Hi, my name is Patricia, and if anyone had told me back then that all this chaos would begin at 29, I would have just laughed and waved it off, because life at that point seemed, while not exactly glamorous, at least quite predictable. I worked as a manager at a large retail company, in the heart of the city, where the streets never sleep and people scurry back and forth with paper cups of coffee, as if their entire existence were a series of urgent meetings and endless deadlines. I started there straight out of college, 7 years ago, when it still smelled of naivety and it seemed like a career would be its own reward, if only I showed diligence. The salary was decent, nothing to complain about, but it wasn't the kind of pay that would allow me to relax either. I rented a small apartment, lonely as I was, with one bedroom, a tiny kitchen that always smelled of toast and cheap coffee, and a bathroom that seemed to have seen more lives than I had in my entire life, but it was my space, rented, perhaps shabby, but honestly paid for every morning of work. Let me tell you about my family, because without it, it's impossible to understand why some things still ache so deeply within me. My parents, Edwidge and David, were people, as I like to say, with principles and, if I'm honest, sometimes stubbornness bordering on cruelty. When I turned 18, they sat me down at the kitchen table, where there was always a vase of artificial flowers, and gave me a speech I've remembered forever. "You're an adult now, Patricia," my mother said. "It's time to find your own way, to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." Dad nodded silently, as if signing his name to that sentence, and that was it. No promise of help with college fees, no support, not a penny for books, as if growing up wasn't measured by mental maturity, but by the ability to survive without a safety net. I was left to figure everything out on my own: scholarships, part-time jobs, debt, and cold nights when the dorm's heat went out. And all this happened while my younger sister, Elma, just 4 years younger, received literally everything she could want from her parents. They'd saved for her since birth, given her new dresses, the latest iPhone, private lessons, and trips. The favoritism was so obvious that I wasn't angry anymore. It just hurt. It hurt to the point of nausea when I heard my mother tell a neighbor that Elma was the future of the family, while they only remembered me on holidays, as if I'd somehow happened by chance, somewhere between two planes. College wasn't so much a test of wit as it was of endurance. I shared a dreadful apartment with 2 roommates, Sarah and Sylvia, and the place felt more like a temporary shelter for weary souls than a home. The cockroaches in the kitchen acted like they owned the place. The heating kept blowing on and off, and the landlord disappeared for weeks at a time. We laughed to keep from crying, drank instant coffee that always tasted bitter, and swore we'd get out of this hellhole someday. I worked at the corner grocery store, sorting fruit, mopping floors, and bagging groceries to pay rent and buy textbooks. There were weeks when I ate cheap ramen for 3 days straight because I simply had no money. And yet, one thread of warmth connected me to the world: my grandmother, Rosa, my father's mother. She lived in another state, far away, but her presence felt like a quiet, constant care. Grandma was a woman of remarkable fortune. Once, in her youth, she had made wise investments and now lived in a large house with a garden and an old but shiny car that she adored. The only thing that clouded her life was her hearing. It was leaving her slowly, like the sea at low tide, even with hearing aids. She couldn't hear phone calls, so we communicated mostly through text messages. Sometimes, once every few months, I'd get a short message from her: "Check your account, my dear," and almost always, a transfer would follow, 1,000, sometimes 2. I remember crying, my face buried in an old pillow, when I saw the bank statement. It meant that for a while I'd be able to eat real food, buy books without begging my classmates, and maybe allow myself a little peace. I wrote her back long, rambling messages: "Grandma, you saved my life again. I don't know what I'd do without you." She always replied briefly, but with a special tenderness: "I'm proud of you, Patty, keep learning, everything else will come." Those words warmed me better than any heating system. Thanks to her help, I was able to take fewer part-time jobs and actually study, not just survive between shifts. If it weren't for her, I probably never would have graduated from college. And here I am, 7 years later, in the same city where the morning noise of traffic mingles with the smell of coffee and dust, working tirelessly and saving every penny as if something more than just the numbers in my bank account depended on it. Sometimes it feels like my entire day is one long check, where expenses and savings stand side by side, but my heart still chooses the latter. I want my own, real, personal home, even if it's tiny, even if it's not in the best neighborhood, but mine. Where no one will say the lease is up, where the walls will remember only my voice, where I can put my cup not where it should but where it suits me. For this, I deny myself literally everything: no dinners out, no new clothes except what I really need, no vacations. Even though my body has been whispering for a break for a long time, I put every dollar into a savings account, like laying bricks for a future home, slowly, carefully, with the faith that one day something real will grow out of it. We barely communicate with my family, and I've stopped seeing it as a tragedy. It's just a fact. Like the weather, Mom and Dad call rarely, once a month, and then more often than not out of a desire to check on me, but to complain. The neighbors are noisy, gas prices have gone up, Dad's having problems at work. Elma writes occasionally, but each time her messages begin with the words, "Look what I got," and then a photo of a new bag, a phone, a trip to the beach. I try to respond calmly, but somewhere deep down, each photo of hers seems to gently press on an old wound, reminding me of the injustice that once burned me to tears. Sometimes I check her social media pages: designer clothes, expensive restaurants, sunny photos. Perhaps this is happiness, I think, although I'm not sure I believe what I'm telling myself. Lately, I've been thinking about Grandma Rosa a lot, and guilt has become my constant companion. She's aging, her health is failing, and I write less and less, increasingly finding excuses: work, fatigue, endless chores. I work 10 hours a day, come home drained, as if all my energy has been drained, and the weekends are spent simply catching up with life: laundry, cleaning, cooking, a little sleep. Sometimes, already in bed, I write her short messages: "Grandma, I miss you," and almost always get a reply the next day: "Me too, Patty, take care." And yet, it's still not enough. By my 30th birthday, I decided that this couldn't go on, that I needed to somehow reconnect, to rekindle the warmth that once saved me. So I wrote Grandma a message, inviting her to a small party in honor of my birthday. I even smiled, imagining her entering my tiny apartment, sitting at the table, looking at me with her soft eyes, and telling me how her granddaughter had grown. But when the reply came, the smile faded. Grandmother wrote that she wasn't feeling well, that her heart was playing up, and the trip was too difficult for her. She apologized, saying she really wanted to be there, but had already given my gift to her parents, and they would bring it to me. I replied that I understood everything, that her health was the most important thing, but it still left a sour taste in my mouth, as if the holiday without her had lost its meaning. When the day finally arrived, I invited a few friends from work: Paula, Basilio, and Nicoletta. We agreed it would be simple: pizza, cake, a little wine, and laughter, nothing fancy. I prepared everything in advance, set out candles to brighten the dim light, and was as nervous as a schoolgirl. My parents and Elma, as usual, were the last to arrive. They entered my small apartment as if they were stepping into a dorm room, reeking of alien life. "This place is so small, Patricia," Mom said, looking around as if searching for dust to point out. "The lighting is terrible," Dad added, squinting at my old ceiling light. Elma, without a word, rolled her eyes and plopped down on the couch, immediately burying her head in her phone. They handed me gifts: cheap perfume from Mom, a cloying scent, like a sweet that quickly wears off, a gift certificate to Dad's restaurant, one I'd certainly never go to, and a book from Elma, a banal novel, still with the price tag on the cover. I smiled and thanked them, though inside I felt nothing but weariness from this spectacle. "And here's a gift from your grandmother," Mom said, taking a box out of her bag. Inside was a vase, crystal, heavy, as if exuding luxury. Candlelight played on its facets, and I suddenly felt tears welling up in my throat. "She wanted you to have this," Mom added, not looking at me. "Thank you," I said quietly, taking the vase in my hands. It was cool and weighty, and I knew it wasn't just a gift, it was her touch from afar. They stayed exactly 30 minutes, I timed it. Elma was glued to her phone, Mom was complaining about the traffic, and Dad was checking his watch every 5 minutes. "Well, we should go," Mom said suddenly, getting up. "We have things to do." "Yeah, it's been a busy day," Dad muttered, already pulling on his jacket. And just like that, they were gone, leaving behind silence and the scent of someone else's perfume. My friend stayed until late in the evening. We laughed, ate pizza, talked about all sorts of trivial things, but all the while, one thought lingered inside me, heavy as that crystal vase on the shelf: this is my family, here it is, and that's what I understand. After everyone left, the apartment felt like mine again, quiet, a little tired, as if even the walls had sighed with relief. I cleared the plates, wiped the table, stacked the pizza boxes, and finally sank onto the sofa, holding the vase. It was astonishingly beautiful, transparent, pure, as if a frozen drop of light lived within it. I ran my finger along its cool surface, and it seemed I could feel my grandmother's hand again, the same one that once stroked my hair while I read her letters aloud. "Thank you," I said quietly, and, taking out my phone, typed a short message. "Grandma, thank you for the gift, it's beautiful, I love you." After sending it, I sat for a long time, simply gazing at the reflections of light in the crystal, listening to the cars passing outside, and feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and loneliness. A month had passed since my birthday, and everything had returned to normal: work, reports, short lunches at the computer, evening to-do lists that never ended. I felt like I was back on a wheel that was spinning on its own, and all I could do was run. On Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk, staring at my quarterly reports, when the phone rang. I glanced at the screen automatically. The caller ID showed my cousin Rachel's name. I hadn't heard from her in months, and the call surprised me. I thought maybe something had happened, or more likely, some family story, the kind she likes. "Hi, Rachel, how are you?" I answered, trying to sound cheerful, even though my eyes were already hurting from the numbers. "Patricia," she said, a strange tension in her voice, "I had to call you about this. Honestly, I'm shocked." I sat up in my chair, shocked by what? What happened? "Well, about Elma buying the house, of course," she breathed out, and I heard a light laugh, masking her confusion. "I mean, at her age. How could she even afford that?" I froze, my fingers hovered over the keyboard, the cursor blinking on the screen like a pulse. "Wait," I said slowly, "what are you talking about? What house?" There was a silence on the other end, short but heavy, like before a storm. "Patricia," she finally whispered, "you really don't know, do you?" "Don't know what, Rachel?" "Elma had a housewarming party 2 days ago," she said quietly, as if afraid to hurt me. "A big party, at least 50 people. The house is absolutely wonderful, not huge, but cozy, with a garden, a veranda. Everyone was asking where you were." I felt the air thicken. As if it were hard to breathe. "I wasn't invited," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I figured it out," Rachel replied, "but your parents told everyone that you don't like noise, that you don't like parties, that you're too withdrawn." I closed my eyes, something hit my head, like a blow from within. "But that's not all," she added quietly. "Later, I heard your mom talking to mine. She said you were jealous of Elma, that you were upset because she bought the house and you didn't." Anger rose instantly, like a wave washing over me. "Jealous, bitter, burning." "Rachel," I said through clenched teeth, "I didn't even know about this damn house. No one told me anything." "Jesus, Patricia," was all she could breathe. "This is very weird." I didn't answer. We said goodbye, and I stared at my phone, feeling my insides shaking. My 25-year-old sister had bought a house. How? She'd just recently graduated from university, worked part-time at some coffee shop, and complained about barely having enough money for gas. Where was she going to get the money for a house? The next morning, I couldn't resist calling her directly. My heart was pounding, as if I was about to ask a question that would change everything. She didn't answer until the third ring. "Hi," Elma said, her voice holding its usual lightness. "Elma," I tried to speak calmly, "I heard you bought a house. Why didn't you invite me to the housewarming?" Her laugh came over the phone, short, ringing, almost mocking. "Oh, Patricia, come on, you don't like parties, you know that." "That's not true," I replied sharply, "and you know it. I would have come if you'd invited me." She paused, then said indifferently, "Well, whatever, it's not that big of a problem." I took a deep breath, holding back the words I wanted to blurt out. "Where did you get the money, Elma? To buy a house?" For a few seconds, the line seemed to go dead. I thought she'd hung up, but then I heard her voice change. It became cold, caustic. "My mom and dad gave it to me," she said calmly, almost lazily, "and anyway, it's none of your business. I have to go." And before I could respond, the line went dead. I was left standing in the middle of the room, holding the phone in my hand, feeling as if someone had just pulled the rug out from under me. The next 3 months became an endless torment for me, as if life had decided to test my mettle in the most petty way, not with big events, but with the quiet stings that came daily from my phone screen. Elma never missed a single opportunity to remind everyone how wonderful her home was now. She posted photos of her perfectly laid breakfasts on the marble countertop, and sunsets from the backyard, where everything looked so well kept, as if life itself were applauding. Under each photo, she wrote, "So grateful to my wonderful parents for making this possible." Those words seemed to slap me in the face every time I accidentally scrolled through my feed and saw her beaming smile, that look of someone who knows nothing of need, doubt, or struggle. Each of her posts was like a slap in the face, a reminder that all that time, while I was eating ramen noodles for 3 days straight, my parents had been saving money, not for me, but to buy Elma a house. I caught myself thinking back to my student apartment, the peeling walls, the kitchen where cockroaches scurried about as if they belonged, and the evenings when I'd sit under the lamp, counting coins to make enough for transportation and coffee. And now, the realization that all this time there'd been an account somewhere, carefully funded so my little sister could live in comfort, felt like someone was burning a slow fire inside me. A little time passed, and a new event arose that seemed destined to bring the family together: my parents' 35th wedding anniversary. I really wanted to go, perhaps for the first time in a long time. I just wanted to be part of something family-like, without any sarcasm or resentment. I even bought them a gift, a beautiful, expensive silver frame with their wedding photo. I found an old picture of Mom in a lace dress and Dad smiling like a boy. It cost me almost $200. But I thought it was meaningful, that maybe they would feel my love even if they never expressed theirs. A few days later, I saw a post on Mom's Facebook page, a big announcement with the date, time, and name of a restaurant, some fancy, expensive place downtown. Mom wrote, "I can't wait to celebrate this special day with our loved ones." I reread the message several times, trying to figure out why no one had called. Maybe they were just busy organizing, I told myself. Maybe the invitation was still to come. But 3 days before the anniversary, I received a message from Grandma Rose. "I've been feeling better lately," she wrote, "and I'm looking forward to celebrating David and Edwidge's anniversary. It will be wonderful to see you in person again, dear. I know you're busy, but it's so nice that we'll be together soon." My heart leapt. Grandma was coming. I hadn't seen her in so long. I missed her soft voice, her quiet care. I was practically glowing with joy, imagining how I would go up to her, hug her, and hear her say again, "Oh, Patty, how you've changed." But the very next day, the phone rang again. Mom was on the screen. I smiled, not suspecting anything untoward. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I'm so looking forward to Saturday. I already bought you and Dad a present." There were a few seconds of silence, and then I suddenly felt a strange tension in her voice. "Patricia, we need to talk about Saturday," she said slowly. "Okay," I replied. "Did something happen?" "We decided," Mom paused, then exhaled, "we decided we don't want you to come." I almost dropped the phone. "What? What do you mean? Why?" "We had to reduce the number of seats," she said in a calm, practiced voice, as if explaining not to her daughter but to a casual acquaintance. "Your presence isn't really necessary. You can congratulate us later, at home." I tried to see if I was hearing correctly. "Wait," I said, feeling the blood rush to my face, "but why don't you want me there? It's the anniversary." But there was no answer. There was a short breath on the other end, and then a click. She simply hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, completely stunned. Everything inside me felt like it had turned to stone. Before, I probably would have burst into tears, or just stayed home, like I always did, but this time, everything was different. Grandma Rosa was supposed to be there, my grandmother, the one without whose help I might never have graduated from college. I hadn't seen her in years, and I knew she was waiting for me, and I wasn't about to let my parents take that away from me. The next day, I carefully wrapped the gift, added a short note, wishing you a wonderful holiday and many happy years ahead, and sent it off by courier. And on Saturday morning, I opened my closet and took out my best dress, blue, slightly shimmery, the very one I once wore to a colleague's graduation. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this day. I put on makeup, tied my hair, and went to the restaurant. When I walked into the room, I froze. At least 40 people were seated at long tables, laughter, glasses, music, waiters in white shirts, and among all those faces, I immediately spotted her, Grandma Rosa. She was sitting closer to the stage, in the place of honor, wearing a blue dress, her hair neatly combed, a little thinner, but still the same, my grandmother, and at that moment, it seemed to me that I had come for a reason, that there was still a chance for something real ahead. As soon as my parents noticed me at the entrance, their faces contorted with surprise and alarm, as if I wasn't their daughter, but some uninvited witness to someone else's secret. My mother, pale, jumped up from her seat and almost ran toward me, clasping her hands as if she were about to plead. "Patricia, what are you doing here?" she said, trying to smile, but her voice trembled, and her eyes darted around, as if searching for an escape route. "I told you not to come," she whispered insistently, grabbing my hand and looking at me as if my presence were shattering the carefully constructed facade of their perfect family life. Dad came up behind me, frowning, and said quietly but firmly, "Please, just go. Now is not the time or place for this." I stood in the middle of the room, feeling the gaze of dozens of guests on me, and was about to respond, when suddenly a familiar voice rang out, loud and trembling with joy, impossible to miss. "Patricia, my beautiful granddaughter. I'm so glad to see you." Grandma Rosa cried, her voice echoing throughout the restaurant, causing everyone to turn around. Due to her hearing problems, she always spoke louder than necessary, and now her words rang through the high ceiling of the room, as if splitting the evening in two. All heads turned in my direction, Mom and Dad froze in place, like two wax figures. Grandma waved to the waiter and demanded, "David, Edwidge, bring Patricia to me. Let her sit next to me. I haven't seen that girl in so long." And at that moment, with dozens of eyes fixed on me and polite bewilderment frozen on the guests' faces, my parents realized they had no choice. With forced smiles, the look of people whose pretense was crumbling, they led me to the table where Grandma was sitting. Elma sat on the other side of her, radiating irritation and coldness, and when Mom made her move to make room for me next to Grandma, she did so with an air of disdain as if I'd just insulted her by my presence. "There's my girl," Grandma said, squeezing my hand with her bony but still strong fingers. "Now this is a real family celebration." Her smile was genuine, her eyes lit up, and I felt something inside me thaw a little, for the first time in a long time. When dinner began, everyone tried to act as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Soft jazz began to play, waiters carried plates of steaming food, some raised glasses, some laughed, but I felt the tension radiating from my table like an electric current. Mom and Dad glanced at me from time to time, quickly, nervously, as if they were afraid I was about to say something that would shatter their carefully crafted illusion of a perfect family. Elma looked at me across the table with open hostility, eyes full of hatred, lips pressed tightly together, as if my presence had negated everything she considered her right. When Uncle Basilio raised his glass to propose a toast, he spoke loudly, as always, with feigned solemnity, to David and Edwidge. To 35 years of love, loyalty, and endless care for the family. And the guests, obediently repeating after him, raised their glasses. Aunt Susan added that my parents were an example to everyone, that they had always been kind and generous, that their home was open to everyone. I sat there, feeling my hands go numb. I listened to all this praise and wondered, did they really believe they were telling the truth? Were they talking about the David and Edwidge I knew? The ones who asked their own daughter not to come to their party? Grandma Rose held my hand the whole time, and every time someone made a toast, she squeezed it lightly, as if reminding me I wasn't alone. "I'm so glad you're here, dear," she'd say. "It's been too long, I've missed you." I looked at her and felt the tension melt away, her warmth taking my breath away. She looked more fragile than before, her skin thinner, her hair slightly silvered, but her eyes were the same, clear, attentive, full of life. I noticed a diamond necklace around her neck. Something I'd never seen before, it shimmered in the candlelight like tiny stars. When the main course arrived, Grandma suddenly turned to me and, smiling, said loudly, "Patricia, how do you like living in the house I gave you for your 30th birthday?" At that very moment, the restaurant fell silent, that same dead, hushed silence when even the sounds of knives and forks cease and the air seems thick with tension. All heads turned toward us again. I felt the blood drain from my face and leaned toward Grandma, trying to speak clearly and softly. "Grandma, I don't know anything about any house, Mom and Dad gave me a beautiful vase from you for my birthday." Her face changed instantly, from calm to tension, then confusion, and finally, anger flashed in her eyes. "Vase? What vase?" she asked loudly, so that the whole room could hear. At that moment, I heard two forks fall simultaneously, a loud, metallic clang. I turned around and saw my parents, both sitting there, white as chalk, their hands shaking. Dad stared at his plate, as if trying to disappear. Mom bit her lip, her shoulders shaking. All the guests looked from them, to Grandma, to me, unsure of what was happening. Grandma Rose turned slowly, almost solemnly, to my parents, and not a trace of the softness that had been there a few minutes earlier remained on her face. Her eyes, usually kind and tired, now flashed with an icy anger that seemed capable of burning through the air. When she spoke, her voice was loud, confident, filled with steel and years of authority, which came not from her position, but from life experience. "David, Edwidge, I want you to explain to me right now where the money I gave you to buy Patricia's house went," she said, enunciating each word clearly, as if she were delivering a verdict. The restaurant immediately fell dead silent. It seemed the very air froze, even the background music suddenly stopped, as if the waiter had turned off the speaker in a panic. I heard someone inhale loudly through their nose, and the clink of glasses on a distant table. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared say a word. Dad raised his head, his face ashen, and, visibly shaking, he forced out, "Mom, maybe we should discuss this alone?" His voice was strained and brittle, as if he was about to scream, but Grandma cut him off abruptly, slamming her palm on the table so hard the glasses shook. "No," she screamed, "I want to know now. I gave you the money for Patricia's house 3 months ago. I helped you with the realtor. I saw the papers. I personally signed the papers to transfer the house to her. I even gave you the keys to give to her for her birthday. Where is this house, David?" Her voice grew louder, and with each new word, the restaurant sank deeper into a tense silence. I watched Dad stand up, his chair scraping loudly across the floor, making a sharp, cutting sound. He stood with his head bowed, his hands shaking, as if he were trying to speak but the words were stuck in his throat. Mom was crying quietly, her face covered with a napkin, her shoulders shaking, her eyes red. And suddenly Dad said, barely audible, "Mom, we gave the house to Elma." These words hung in the air like a gunshot. People at the neighboring tables gasped. Someone set a glass down too hard, and the glass clinked in response, as if it couldn't believe what it had just heard. My hands went cold, and I couldn't move. It seemed like the entire room exhaled simultaneously. "What?" Grandma Rosa's voice was so loud that I thought the windows shook. Her face flushed, and she rose abruptly, leaning against the table. At that moment, Elma jumped up from her seat. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glistened with tears, and she almost screamed, "This house is mine. Mom and Dad gave it to me. I'm not giving it to anyone." "Elma, sit down." Grandma barked, and even the waiters standing by the wall recoiled. "This house was bought for Patricia, with my money." "I don't care," Elma cried, choking with resentment. "This is my house now. I've lived there for months, and no one has the right to take it away from me." She stood there, out of breath, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks, leaving wet streaks across her perfectly made-up face. She looked like a child trying to take away a toy, but beneath all this hysterical despair, I suddenly saw fear of being exposed, fear of being left with nothing. The entire restaurant was now openly watching the proceedings, making no attempt to pretend everything was normal. Their heads had turned to look at us, some already holding phones, pointing the camera in our direction, others quietly whispering in the ear of their neighbors. The air was thick, charged with tension, as if everything was a scene from a soap opera unfolding live on television. Grandma Rosa slowly straightened, leaning on her cane, and said coldly, "David, Edwidge, come here, now." My parents exchanged glances, like two people just being brought into court, and hesitantly approached her. I saw my father's fingers tremble, my mother sniffling. As if trying to compose herself, Grandma leaned forward slightly, pressed her finger to her hearing aid, and spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, so quiet that even I, sitting next to her, couldn't hear a word. I watched their faces, how their expressions changed every second, first confusion, then fear, then shame that was impossible to hide. Mom covered her mouth with her hand, as if she were about to vomit. Her eyes filled with horror, Dad, completely white, nodded again and again, like a man who had realized the enormity of what he had done. This scene lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, Grandma leaned back in her chair and waved her hand, briefly, wearily, as if she had said her last word. My parents returned to their seats. They looked as if the whole world had collapsed on them. Dad was still shaking, his hands unresponsive. Mom wiped away her smudged makeup, leaving dark marks on her face, like an actress after a long tragedy. Dad stood up, raised his hands as if trying to hold the audience's attention, and said in a hoarse voice, "Thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate you celebrating with us, but perhaps we should end the party here. It's time for everyone to go home." The guests began to rise, some awkwardly clapping him on the shoulder, others simply averting their eyes. A murmur filled the air, soft as the rustling of paper, filled with fragments of phrases. "Did you hear what she said about the house? Oh, my God, the poor girl, how could they give her house to her sister?" I would have died of shame. Elma was still sitting in the same place, but no longer screaming. She simply wept quietly, her face buried in her hands, like a child who has lost something priceless. And I, sitting next to my grandmother, felt for the first time in many years that the truth was finally beginning to break through, breaking down the walls of lies they had built. I turned to Grandma Rosa, looking at her tired but still proud face, and quietly asked, "Would you like to spend the night with me?" She looked at me as if she'd been expecting this question since the moment I walked into the restaurant. "Yes, dear," she said calmly, but her voice was thick with barely contained hurt. "I don't want to stay with them after what they did." Her hand was still shaking as she reached for her purse, and without thinking, I helped her up, wrapped her scarf around it, and grabbed her coat. "I'll call a courier to pick up your things from Mom and Dad's house," I said, trying to keep my voice even though I was seething inside. Grandma nodded, smiling faintly. "That would be ideal, Patricia." We left the restaurant together, under the watchful eyes of the guests, who pretended not to notice, although each of them hungrily followed our every movement. My parents remained inside, desperately explaining something to the guests, making excuses, apologizing, a scene I wanted to escape as far as possible. Elma didn't look up from the table. She sat motionless, as if petrified, with only her shoulders trembling slightly. When we got into the car, I immediately pulled out my phone and called a courier. The voice on the other end was polite, and I explained briefly, "I need someone to pick up a suitcase and a few personal items from my parents' address and bring them to my home. Everything belongs to Rosa Ferrari. Just say you're picking up Grandma Rosa's things for Patricia." I recited the addresses, trying to keep my voice steady, though a storm was still raging inside: humiliation, anger, a sense of injustice that I didn't know what to do with. When we arrived at my place, Grandma Rosa sank heavily onto the sofa, took off her shoes with relief, and sighed deeply, as if she'd lifted a long-standing burden from her shoulders. She looked exhausted, not just from the fatigue of the evening, but from everything that lay behind it: betrayal, pain, deception. Her hands lay motionless in her lap, but her fingers still held the same strength, like someone who never gave up. About an hour later, the doorbell rang. It was the delivery man, a tall young man with a polite smile, holding a suitcase and a small bag of medications. I opened the door, thanked him, and gave him a good tip. He carried our things into the room, wished us good night, and left without asking a single question, and for that, I was grateful. "There you are, Grandma," I said, retrieving the suitcase from the hallway. "Now you have everything you need." She looked up and smiled softly, genuinely. "Thank you, Patricia. You're such a good girl. Forgive me, it took me so long to understand what your parents are really like." There was bitterness in her voice, but also tenderness, as if this admission were releasing her from something heavy. We sat in my small living room, where the lamplight cast warm pools on the walls, and talked longer than ever before. Time passed slowly, as if it wanted to give us the chance to say everything. I told her about my life, about my work, about the people I'd met, about how often I'd missed her advice and support. Then we moved on to this evening, to what had happened at that damned restaurant table. "I just don't understand how they thought they could hide this from you," I said, feeling a wave of indignation rising inside me again. "Did they really believe you'd never know they'd given my house to Elma?" Grandmother Rosa sighed long and wearily, like someone who had no more strength left to be angry. "I think they hoped I wouldn't live to see it," she replied calmly, but there was a chill in that calm that sent shivers down my spine. My health had been failing me lately, and they knew it. They probably thought I'd die sooner or be too ill to come and check the house in person. I froze, looking at her, unable to believe my ears. The coldness of her words shook me to the core. "This is terrible," I whispered. She nodded, clutching the armrest of the sofa. "Your father sent me pictures of your home," she said with a bitter smile. "He assured me you were happy, that you loved it there, that you were grateful for this gift." I believed him, Patricia. I believed him because I trusted him. I stood up, went into the kitchen, and pulled out the vase, the very one they'd given me for my birthday, wrapped in bright paper, and telling her it was a gift from my grandmother. "Here," I said, returning and placing it on the table in front of her. "This is what they gave me instead of house keys." Grandma picked up the vase, turned it over, examining it carefully, as if she were seeing it for the first time, and suddenly burst into laughter, quietly, nervously, but infectiously. I couldn't help myself. We both laughed like crazy, until tears came, until my stomach hurt. "A vase instead of a house," Grandma said, wiping her eyes. "That's simply brilliant. It's wonderful, Patricia. But, alas, it's definitely not a house." Her laughter died down, and silence filled the room once more. The lamp flickered, the wind rustled outside, and I saw Grandma's face gradually become serious, as if a shadow had passed across it. Grandma Rosa, still holding the vase, placed it on the table in front of her. Then she straightened up, and something firm and decisive appeared in her eyes, as if she had finally made an important decision. "Patricia," she said slowly, "I need to tell you exactly what I told your parents this evening when I invited them over." I froze, listening to every word. My grandmother's voice sounded unusual, no longer soft, no longer the weariness of old age, but with that inner steel that I realized had always been there, but had long been hidden beneath a mask of kindness and trust. "Your father," she began, frowning slightly, "has been using my personal bank account for several years now. Every time they needed money, for things for Elma, for vacations, for furniture, for all their necessities, as they called them, they simply took it from there. I allowed David access because he's my son, and I foolishly thought I could trust him, but now I realize they took my trust for granted, like some inexhaustible source." I looked at her, disbelieving my ears. "Grandma, I didn't know. Are you saying that all this time, Dad was simply withdrawing money from your account?" She nodded. "Yes, dear, and not only withdrawing, he did it with such calm, as if he had every right to do so. But tonight, everything changed. Starting tomorrow, I'm cutting them off from all access. No more free withdrawals, no more support, no more gifts, no more loans. It's all over." I felt a strange feeling, a mixture of relief and bitterness, relief that justice was finally being restored, and bitterness that all this stemmed not from love, but from broken trust. Grandma continued, more decisively now. "I also told them that I'm changing my will. Everything I own will go to you now. The house, the accounts, the stocks, the savings, it's all yours, Patricia. I'll make the changes tomorrow, and your parents and Elma will only get small amounts, just enough so they can't contest the will, not a penny more." I had nothing to say. I simply took her hand, feeling it tremble, and nodded silently. We talked until almost 2 in the morning. We talked about everything, the past, family, how things had gone so far, and how strange it is that a person can sometimes become blinded by love for their children. By the time we finally went to bed, I felt closer to my grandmother than ever in my life. There were no secrets or omissions left between us, only the truth, painful, but cathartic. The next morning, as I was putting the coffee on, there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened it, I almost dropped my cup. My parents stood there. They looked as if they hadn't slept all night. Their faces were drawn, their eyes bloodshot. Dad held a set of keys in his hand and, without looking at me, quietly said, "These are for you." I didn't understand at first. "What is this?" I asked. He sighed, not looking up. "The keys to the house, that house. I took them without telling Elma." His voice wavered, a strange mixture of shame and relief in it. Mom stood next to him, silent, her expression blank, as if everything that was happening wasn't happening to her. I simply took the keys and closed the door without saying a word. The next day, I drove Grandma Rosa to the train station. She was getting ready to go home to finalize all the changes, the will, the bank documents, the powers of attorney, as we parted, she hugged me tightly, just like when we were children, and whispered, "Don't be afraid, Patricia, now everything will be fair." I watched her go until the train disappeared around the corner, and only then did I feel a heavy sigh leave my chest, as if an entire era had passed with me, an era of lies, manipulation, and fear. After she left, I went there, to my home, my real home, the one that should have been mine all along. When I opened the door, I experienced a strange feeling, as if I'd entered an alien space, where every object reminded me that this house hadn't been chosen for me. The kitchen was pink, too soft, almost doll-like, the kind Elma had always liked. The bedroom was painted lavender, her favorite shade, not mine. But all of this was now mine, mine by right, and looking at the walls, I felt I could make this house a place where I could finally breathe freely. The first thing I did was call a locksmith and change all the locks. Then I called the landlord of my old apartment and told him I was moving out. This was a new stage, not just in my life, but in my soul. I was moving into my own home, into my own life, where there was no longer room for betrayal. A week passed when the doorbell rang in the evening. Elma stood on the threshold. I barely recognized her. Her hair was disheveled, her face puffy from tears, her clothes rumpled. She looked as if her world had collapsed. "Patricia," she said in a trembling voice, "I need to talk to you." I silently stepped aside, letting her in, but she remained standing in the doorway. "Now I live with Mom and Dad," she sobbed, "and I hate it. They make me work. They don't give me money, they fight about money all the time. Can I live here with you until I get back on my feet?" I just looked at her. It was incredible. She had the nerve to ask for this. "No, Elma," I said calmly, "this is my home. You had a chance to live here, and you knew it wasn't yours." She blinked, as if she couldn't believe she'd heard a refusal. "Patricia, come on, we're sisters. Sisters are supposed to help each other," I answered firmly. "Sisters don't steal from each other, and they don't expel each other from the family. You made your choice." I closed the door in her face. For the next month, my parents called me nonstop. They apologized, begged, tried to appeal to my pity, asked me to talk to my grandmother so she wouldn't change the will. "Please, Patricia," my mother cried, "we made a terrible mistake, we realize it." But I told her what I should have said long ago. "You're not sorry you did it, you're sorry you got caught." Then I hung up and blocked their numbers forever. 6 months have passed since that fateful dinner, after which my whole life seemed to straighten its shoulders, freed from years of burden. Since then, I haven't spoken to my parents or Elma once. Sometimes I think the silence that followed all that screaming, excuses, and lies was the most precious gift I could have received. I don't miss their endless dramas, or their favoritism, or the nagging feeling that I'm always falling short, that I'm always doing something wrong. Now I live peacefully, without the constant fear of being blamed or humiliated, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm truly starting to feel like home. Not as a place to just sleep, but as a space where I can breathe deeply. First, I painted over all those pretentious pink and lavender walls that recalled Elma's tastes and chose colors that reflected me, a soft blue, like the sky after rain, and a warm gray, like morning light through fog. I bought furniture that matched my style, not glossy or flashy, but simple, cozy, and full of soul. I planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, rosemary, basil, and a few tomato plants. When I walk out there in the morning with a cup of coffee and hear the leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, I feel like this is my life, and no one else has the power to ruin it. The most important thing is that I visit Grandma Rosa often now. Every other weekend, I take the train to her quiet, sun-drenched town, where the air smells of jasmine and old wood. We make her famous ricotta ravioli together, watch old Audrey Hepburn movies, and can talk for hours about everything: life, people, how strange things sometimes are. She tells me about her investments, how she gradually built her financial independence step by step, and says she wants to teach me everything she knows. "You're exactly the granddaughter I always dreamed of," she told me one evening as we sat on her veranda, drinking tea from porcelain cups that steamed fragrantly. "Smart, honest, and independent. I'm proud of you, Patricia. Your parents raised Elma as a spoiled child, accustomed to getting everything for nothing. But despite all that, you grew up different, strong." It was the first time I allowed myself to cry, not from pain, but from the feeling of finally being seen for who I was. Last week, my grandmother's lawyer called me and told me that the new will was ready. When she dies, hopefully not soon, as her eyes still sparkle with vivacity and playfulness. I will inherit the bulk of her estate. My parents and Elma will each receive $5,000, enough to not feel forgotten, but not enough for it to matter. I listened to the lawyer and felt a strange calm, not triumph, not vengeful satisfaction, but calm, as if everything had finally fallen into place. I continue to work for the trading company, and although the job hasn't changed, now I don't have to count every penny, I don't worry about the electric bill, and I can afford dinner at my favorite cafe, a dress I just like, or a short trip without feeling guilty. It's amazing how differently you perceive life when the constant fear of poverty disappears, when you realize you can stand on your own 2 feet. Occasionally, I still stumble upon Elma's posts on social media. Apparently, she's returned to live with her parents and found a job at some store, where she seems miserable. Her posts are full of resentment, about ungrateful relatives, about an unfair fate. Reading this, I don't feel anger or malice, only mild bewilderment and, perhaps, indifference. I've borne their pain for too long to let it touch me again. From time to time, my parents try to reach me through other relatives. They convey requests for forgiveness for leaving the past in the past, but I always answer the same thing: they made their choice the day they stole my home, and now I'm making my own, building a life where there's no place for them. Some people I know say I'm too judgmental. They're your family, they tell me, but I've realized that blood is no excuse. Being a family means supporting, not destroying, celebrating your victories, not giving them to someone else. Now I have a real family, Grandma Rosa, who loves me not for what I do, but for who I am. Let the rest of us live as best we can, without my help or my participation, and for the first time in 30 years, I finally feel like I deserve all of this: my own home, peace, confidence, and unconditional love. I no longer wait for approval, I no longer seek recognition, I'm not afraid of loneliness. I have everything that truly matters, and when I open the window in the morning to let in the sunlight, I think only one thing: I'm finally home.